The battlefield betrayal. The battlefield was covered in smoke and fire. Explosions shook the ground as human soldiers fought against the Draveri warriors. The war had been going on for years, and neither side was willing to surrender. Captain Ethan Cole moved carefully through the ruins of a destroyed building. His rifle was ready, his heart pounding in his chest. He and his squad had been sent deep into enemy territory to secure an important outpost. But now, the mission had failed. His team was either dead or scattered, and he was alone. As he stepped over the bodies of fallen soldiers, he heard a low, painful growl. Ethan froze, gripping his weapon tightly. The sound came from behind a pile of rubble. He moved closer, peeking over the broken concrete. Lying there, half buried under debris, was a Draveri warrior. His dark, scaled armor was cracked, and his forearms lay limp at his sides. His breathing was heavy, and his deep yellow eyes flickered with pain. Ethan recognized him immediately. Commander Xalrath, one of the Draveri's most feared leaders, a warrior known for his strength and skill in battle. But now he was helpless. Ethan raised his rifle, his finger hovering over the trigger. This was war. He should finish the job. But something stopped him. Xalrath's eyes locked onto Ethan's. There was no fear in them, only something else. Something like anger, frustration, and humiliation. You would kill an unarmed warrior. Xalrath growled, his voice weak but filled with defiance. Ethan hesitated. He had heard the stories about the Draveri. They were ruthless, never taking prisoners, never showing mercy. But right now, the great commander Xalrath was dying, abandoned by his own people. Ethan glanced around. The battlefield was quiet now, only the distant sounds of gunfire echoing through the air. The human forces were retreating. If he stayed here any longer, he would be left behind. He turned to leave. Xalrath was not his problem. He was the enemy. Then he heard something that made him stop. Voices. Ethan crouched low, watching as a group of Draveri soldiers approached. They wore the same dark armor as Xalrath, their weapons drawn, their glowing eyes scanning the battlefield. For a moment, Ethan thought they had come to rescue their commander. But then he saw their expressions. They were not here to save him. One of the Draveri, a tall warrior with a jagged scar across his face, stepped forward. He looked down at Xalrath with disgust. A broken warrior is no warrior at all, the scarred Draveri said coldly. Xalrath's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Another Draveri aimed his plasma rifle at the fallen commander. It is a mercy to end his suffering. Ethan's stomach twisted. He had seen many things in war, but this was something different. They were going to kill their own leader simply because he was wounded. Xalrath, despite his injuries, stared up at them with defiance. "You are cowards," he spat. "You leave me here because I can no longer fight. That is not the way of the Draveri." Scarface laughed. "It is now." He raised his gun. Ethan acted before he could think. Boom. The first shot hit Scarface in the chest, sending him crashing to the ground. The other Draveri turned in shock, but Ethan was faster. He fired again, hitting another soldier before the rest scattered for cover. Xalrath looked at Ethan in disbelief. "What are you doing?" he growled. "Saving your life," Ethan muttered. He grabbed Xalrath's arm and pulled him up. The Draveri warrior let out a sharp breath as pain shot through his body. His legs were completely useless. He was paralyzed from the waist down. Ethan cursed under his breath. This was bad. Carrying an injured soldier, especially a Draveri, would slow him down. But he had no choice. The enemy soldiers would regroup soon. "I should kill you for this," Xalrath grumbled. "Yeah? Well, I just saved your ass, so you're welcome," Ethan shot back. Xalrath didn't reply, but there was something in his eyes, something that looked almost like respect. Ethan lifted him onto his back, gritting his teeth under the weight. Draveri warriors were much heavier than humans. He staggered forward, heading toward the ruins, hoping to find cover before more enemies arrived. As he moved, Xal'Rath's voice came again, low and bitter. "My people will never take me back. To them, I am already dead." Ethan's grip tightened. "Then I guess you're stuck with me." And with that, he carried the fallen warrior into the darkness. The escape begins. Ethan's muscles burned as he carried Xal'Rath on his back. The Draveri warrior was heavier than any human, his armor making it even worse. Every step felt like dragging a mountain, but Ethan forced himself forward. The battlefield behind him was quiet now, only the distant rumble of explosions echoing in the night. But he knew the silence wouldn't last. The Draveri soldiers he attacked would regroup. They would come for him. He had no plan, no backup, and worst of all, no safe place to go. Xal'Rath groaned. His breathing was heavy, his body tense with pain. "Why? Why are you doing this?" His deep voice was weak, but still filled with pride. Ethan didn't answer, because he didn't know. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the simple fact that watching the Draveri abandon their own commander like trash had made him sick. But he knew one thing. If he left Xal'Rath behind, he would be dead within the hour. They reached a collapsed building, a former human outpost now reduced to rubble. Ethan ducked inside, carefully lowering Xal'Rath against a broken wall. His arms shook from exhaustion. Xal'Rath let out a slow, controlled breath, staring at his useless legs. "This is foolishness," he muttered. Ethan checked his ammo. "Yeah, well, unknown for making bad decisions." Xal'Rath's golden eyes flickered toward him. "Then this might be your worst." Before Ethan could reply, he heard something. Footsteps. He froze, quickly pressing his back against the wall. His fingers tightened around his rifle. Through the cracks in the broken building, he saw them. Draveri scouts. At least 4 of them, moving silently, their rifles scanning the battlefield. They were looking for survivors. Looking for him. Ethan glanced at Xal'Rath, who sat perfectly still. The commander's face remained unreadable, but Ethan knew what he was thinking. If the scouts found them, they would kill Ethan on sight. But what would they do to Xal'Rath? Would they still consider him a traitor? Would they execute him like they tried before? Xal'Rath shifted slightly, his claws tapping against his broken armor. "If you are caught, your people will call you a traitor," he whispered. Ethan didn't respond, because he already knew. The Draveri scouts moved closer. One of them stopped right outside the building, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness. Ethan held his breath. The Draveri soldier turned his head. His reptilian eyes glowed faintly in the night. He took a step forward, then another. Ethan slowly raised his rifle, finger on the trigger. Then, a sudden explosion rocked the battlefield. A distant human ship had been shot down, its wreckage crashing into the ground like a meteor. The impact sent a shockwave of dust and fire, momentarily blinding the scouts. Ethan didn't hesitate. He grabbed Xal'Rath and pulled him deeper into the ruins. His boots crunched against the debris, but the noise was drowned out by the chaos outside. The Draveri scouts turned toward the explosion, barking orders at each other. They didn't see Ethan slip away into the shadows. A desperate plan. Ethan didn't stop moving until he was sure they were far enough. When he finally collapsed against a rusted metal wall, his lungs were burning. Xal'Rath, still leaning against him, let out a low rumble. "You are lucky." Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow. "Nah, just stubborn." Xal'Rath's eyes studied him for a long moment. "You should leave me. I am slowing you down." Ethan let out a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah, and what? Let those bastards kill you." Xal'Rath's jaw tightened. He didn't like this. He didn't like being rescued. Didn't like being weak. Ethan could see the war raging inside him, the struggle between his pride and his reality. But Ethan wasn't going to let him die. "I need to get a signal out," Ethan muttered. Call for extraction. Zalrath's brow lifted. Your commanders will never allow you to bring me back. Ethan knew that. He just didn't want to admit it. His radio was still functional, but calling for help would mean explaining why he wasn't alone. His superiors wouldn't accept a Dravari commander as a survivor. They would see him as a prisoner, or worse, a threat. He exhaled sharply. We'll figure it out when we get there. Zalrath's voice darkened. If they try to imprison me, I will fight. Ethan gave him a tired smirk. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a mechanical noise in the distance. Ethan stiffened. He knew that sound. Drones. Dravari patrol drones. Zalrath's expression changed. They are scanning for heat signatures. Ethan gritted his teeth. Shit. He quickly grabbed a handful of dirt and smeared it over his armor. Cover yourself, he whispered. The dust will block some of the heat. Zalrath hesitated, his Dravari pride refusing to take orders from a human. But then he sighed and did as Ethan said. The whirring grew louder. The drone was right above them now, its red lights sweeping over the ruins. Ethan pressed himself against the cold metal, forcing his breath to slow. The drone hovered for what felt like forever. Its scanners buzzed softly, searching for signs of life. Then, it moved on. Ethan let out a slow breath. Close one. Zalrath glanced at him. I never thought I'd be hiding from my own kind. Ethan gave him a dry smile. Welcome to my world. The Dravari commander studied him for a long time. And for the first time, his expression softened. Something had changed between them. They were no longer just enemies trapped in the same war. Now, they were survivors. And survivors looked out for each other, hunted by both sides. The night air was thick with smoke and the distant hum of enemy drones. The battlefield was behind them now, but Ethan knew they were far from safe. Zalrath, still unable to move his legs, leaned against a broken pillar while Ethan checked their surroundings. His golden eyes watched the human with unreadable intensity. You are going to die for this, Zalrath muttered. Ethan snorted, checking his rifle. Yeah, well, at least I won't die alone. Zalrath's expression darkened, but he said nothing. Ethan knew the truth. The moment his own commanders found out that he had saved a Dravari, especially one of their top commanders, they would brand him a traitor. And if the Dravari found them, they wouldn't hesitate to kill Zalrath, their own leader, just because he was injured. They were running from both sides, and they had nowhere to go. A broken alley. Ethan kneeled next to Zalrath, checking his injuries. The Dravari winced but refused to make a sound. His armor was cracked, revealing thick, scaled skin beneath. Ethan shook his head. Your people really left you to rot. Zalrath's jaw tightened. The Dravari do not tolerate weakness. Yeah, that's some bullshit way to treat your own. Zalrath's claws dug into the dirt. A warrior must stand. A warrior must fight. If he cannot, he is already dead. Ethan scoffed. Funny, you don't look dead to me. The Dravari commander gave him a sharp look, as if trying to understand why a human, a sworn enemy, would be risking everything to save him. You are strange, Zalrath said finally. Ethan smirked. Yeah, well, you're not the first to say that. Before Zalrath could reply, a distant noise caught Ethan's attention. Engines. A low, rumbling hum, moving toward them from the north. Vehicles. Ethan cursed under his breath. We need to move. Now. Zalrath flexed his claws. In case you have forgotten, human, my legs do not work. Ethan clenched his jaw. He knew, but staying here meant death. Nowhere to run. Ethan dragged Zalrath onto his back again, muscles screaming in protest. The Dravari commander was heavy, too heavy, but Ethan forced himself forward. The ruins were endless. Twisted metal, broken walls, collapsed towers, but there was nowhere to hide from thermal scanners. The vehicles got closer. Then, a voice came over a loudspeaker. "Ethan Cole, this is Captain Reynolds of the 45th Battalion. Drop your weapon and surrender." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. His own people. They had found him. He stopped moving, frozen between two impossible choices: surrender and turn Xal'Rath in, or run and become a traitor forever. Xal'Rath growled, "They will kill me." Ethan already knew. The humans would never let a high-ranking Draveri commander live. They would execute him. And Ethan, he would be court-martialed for treason. A spotlight flashed over the ruins, sweeping across the rubble. They were searching for him. Then, another sound. A second voice. This one Draveri. "Commander Xal'Rath, surrender and your death will be swift." Ethan's stomach twisted. The Draveri were here too. Both sides wanted them dead. And there was no way out. A desperate decision. Ethan took a deep breath, mind racing. There was no winning this fight. He couldn't take on an entire human strike force and a Draveri execution squad at the same time. "Okay," he muttered. "We're screwed." Xal'Rath grinned, a sharp, fanged grin. "Finally, something we agree on." Ethan peeked over a broken wall. In the distance, human soldiers were moving in formation, their rifles glowing in the night. To the east, Draveri warriors, their eyes like burning embers, stalking forward with their plasma blades drawn. They were closing in. And then, Ethan made a decision that would change everything, betraying his own. Ethan pulled out his radio, switching to an encrypted frequency. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then pressed the button. "This is Captain Ethan Cole," he said quietly. "I have critical intelligence, but I will only share it in exchange for safe passage." A moment of silence. Then, a reply. "Speak." Ethan exhaled. "I have Commander Xal'Rath, alive." Xal'Rath's eyes widened, but he remained silent. Ethan continued, "If you want him, you guarantee my safety. No trial, no execution. Otherwise, I take him straight to my people, and we expose everything." The radio crackled. "You would betray your own kind." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Looks like they already betrayed me first." Silence. Then, a response. "Understood. Transmitting coordinates. Come alone." Ethan looked at Xal'Rath. "That was a risky move, human," the Draveri commander muttered. Ethan gave a tired smirk. "Yeah. Well, I figured you weren't the only one who hates your own people." Xal'Rath tilted his head, a strange expression crossing his face. "Perhaps," he said softly. And with that, Ethan carried his so-called enemy into the darkness, toward an uncertain fate. The hidden truth. The wind howled through the ruins as Ethan moved through the night, carrying the weight of both Xal'Rath and his own choices. His muscles ached, his breathing was ragged, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. He had made a deal with the devil, or maybe with someone worse. A Draveri voice had answered his radio call. Someone high-ranking. Someone who wanted Xal'Rath alive. Why? Xal'Rath, still unable to walk, studied Ethan closely as they moved. "You risked too much for a warrior who would have killed you on sight a day ago." Ethan let out a breathless chuckle. "Yeah, well, I've made a lot of bad decisions lately." Xal'Rath tilted his head, watching Ethan with those predator-like golden eyes. "Perhaps your greatest mistake is assuming I am worth saving." Ethan didn't reply, because part of him was starting to wonder the same thing. But there was no time for second thoughts. The coordinates from the Draveri transmission were only a mile ahead, a hidden facility deep in the ruins. If they made it there, maybe, just maybe, they had a chance to survive. Or maybe it was a trap. Ethan was running out of options. The black site. The facility was not what Ethan expected. It wasn't a Draveri war base. It wasn't a prison. It was something worse. Ethan crouched behind the cover of a wrecked dropship, his heart pounding as he scanned the area. The facility was hidden beneath the ruins, its entrance carved into the rocky ground. The only thing that gave it away was the unnatural glow of alien machinery and the strange, pulsing hum of power beneath the earth. Zal-Rath frowned. This place, it should not exist. Ethan shot him a look. What the hell do you mean? Zal-Rath's eyes narrowed. My people, they never speak of places like this. Ethan wasn't sure what that meant, but he knew one thing. Something about this facility felt wrong. The Draveri had promised him safe passage, but looking at this place, it didn't feel like safety. It felt like a secret that was never meant to be found. The prisoners. Ethan moved carefully, slipping between the shadows, keeping Zal-Rath close. His grip tightened on his rifle. Then he saw them. Humans. Not soldiers. Prisoners. Dozens of them, locked in containment pods, their bodies suspended in strange, glowing fluid. Their faces were frozen in expressions of fear, their limbs limp, their eyes barely open. Ethan's stomach twisted. What the hell? Zal-Rath's face darkened. This is not war. This is something else. Ethan moved toward the nearest pod, his fingers hovering over the control panel. The data readout wasn't in Draveri script. It was in both Draveri and human languages. Ethan's pulse spiked. That meant humans were involved in this. But why? Before he could think, a voice echoed through the chamber. You are not as foolish as I thought, Captain Cole. Ethan whirled around, raising his rifle. A figure stepped forward, a Draveri dressed in sleek, ceremonial armor. His forearms were clasped behind his back, his stance impossibly calm. His golden eyes flickered with amusement. Welcome, he said. I have been expecting you. The betrayal of the Draveri. Zal-Rath stiffened immediately. His body tensed, and for the first time since Ethan had met him, there was something in his expression that looked like fear. High Inquisitor Ralvek. Zal-Rath growled, his voice filled with venom. Ethan glanced between them. You two know each other. Ralvek smiled. It was not a friendly smile. We have history, the Inquisitor said smoothly. Isn't that right, Commander? Zal-Rath clenched his jaw. You are a disgrace to the Draveri. Ralvek chuckled. Ah, yes. The old warrior's pride. His golden eyes shifted to Ethan. Tell me, human, did you truly believe you could make a deal with my kind and walk away? Ethan kept his rifle aimed at the Inquisitor's chest. I don't like games. What the hell is this place? Ralvek spread his arms. This, Captain Cole, is the future. Ethan's grip on his weapon tightened. Those people in the pods don't look like they signed up for the future. Ralvek tilted his head. Oh, but they did. Both your leaders and mine have. A special understanding. The war is simply a distraction, a means to gather. Test subjects. Ethan's blood ran cold. Test subjects. Ralvek smirked at his silence. I assume you have heard of enhancement programs, genetic modifications, the evolution of warriors. Ethan felt his stomach churn. You're experimenting on prisoners. Ralvek's eyes glowed. Not just prisoners. The strongest of both our species, the humans you see here, are soldiers. Captured, broken, rebuilt. Ethan's fingers hovered over the trigger. You mean tortured. Ralvek's smirk deepened. Such a small mind. He turned his gaze to Zal-Rath. You were supposed to die on the battlefield, Commander, Ralvek said, his voice smooth. But you have always been stubborn. A shame. If you had fallen, your remains would have been most useful to our research. Zal-Rath let out a deep, rumbling growl. You disgust me. Ralvek sighed dramatically. So emotional. So human. Ethan had heard enough. Let them go, he said. Ralvek raised a brow. Excuse me. The prisoners, Ethan snapped. Let them go. For a moment, there was silence. Then, Ralvek laughed. A deep, amused chuckle. "Captain Cole," he said smoothly, "I did not bring you here to negotiate." Ethan's grip tightened on his rifle. Then, the lights in the facility changed. A deep, pulsing alarm filled the air. The pod started draining. And suddenly, the prisoners inside opened their eyes. Ethan's stomach twisted. Their eyes were glowing, and their bodies were changing. Ralvek smiled. "Let me introduce you," he said softly, "to the next phase of evolution." The prisoners started moving. Ethan's blood went ice cold, because they weren't human anymore. The sacrifice plan. The sound of hissing gas filled the chamber as the containment pods drained, releasing the twisted, enhanced prisoners into the dimly lit room. Ethan felt his heart slam against his ribs. This wasn't right. The figures inside the pods were once human soldiers. Now, they were something else. Their veins glowed faintly beneath their skin, their bodies elongated and reinforced with unnatural muscle, and their eyes, once human, now pulsed with an eerie golden light. Zal-Rath tensed beside him. "They are not warriors anymore." His voice was heavy with something Ethan had never heard from him before. Fear. Ralvek, the Draveri Inquisitor, watched them with quiet amusement. His long fingers were folded behind his back, his reptilian face unreadable. "You see," Ralvek said smoothly, "both our species have weaknesses. Humans lack the natural strength of the Draveri. And Draveri, well, our arrogance blinds us to certain advantages of human adaptability." One of the transformed soldiers took a step forward. His movements were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet controlled by invisible strings. Ethan tightened his grip on his rifle. Ralvek smiled. "This facility exists to correct those weaknesses. The beings before you are the result of a beautiful partnership between human and Draveri science." Ethan clenched his jaw. "You mean torture?" Ralvek sighed. "Always so dramatic." He raised a hand, and the enhanced soldiers all turned to him, waiting for orders. "They are more than warriors now," Ralvek said softly. "They are the future." Then, he pointed at Ethan. "Kill them." The enhanced soldiers lunged. The fight for survival. Ethan fired first. His rifle kicked against his shoulder as the first bullet struck one of the twisted soldiers square in the chest. It didn't stop. Ethan barely had time to move before the creature slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. Its strength was inhuman. Bones reinforced, muscles enhanced beyond normal limits. Zal-Rath, despite his injuries, lashed out with his claws, catching another enhanced soldier across the chest. The creature stumbled, but didn't fall. "These are not warriors," Zal-Rath growled. "They are monsters." Ethan rolled to his feet, breathing hard. "Then let's put them down." They fought desperately, but the odds were impossible. For every enhanced soldier they took down, two more closed in. Ethan's mind raced. There had to be a way out. Then he saw it, a control panel near the containment pods. It was linked to something important. "Cover me," Ethan shouted. Zal-Rath barely had the strength to fight, but he still bared his fangs and charged forward, dragging his paralyzed legs behind him. Ethan sprinted toward the control panel, dodging a swipe from one of the mutated soldiers. His pulse pounded in his ears. If he was right about this, he slammed his fist against the panel. A warning alarm blared through the facility. The entire chamber began to shake. Ralvek's expression finally changed, his amusement replaced with cold fury. "You fool," he hissed. The walls groaned as an emergency failsafe activated. The containment pods, all of them, overloaded at once. And then, everything exploded. The escape plan. The shockwave threw Ethan off his feet as the containment pods erupted in white-hot energy, sending debris flying in all directions. Ralvek disappeared in the chaos, his cloak whipping as he vanished into the smoke. The enhanced soldiers twisted and screamed, their unnatural bodies convulsing as the energy from the pods overloaded their enhancements. Ethan coughed, his vision spinning as he scrambled to his feet. Zalrath groaned beside him. His body was heavily injured, his breathing ragged. Ethan grabbed his arm. "We need to move. Now." The facility was collapsing around them. Massive support beams groaned as explosions ripped through the structure. There was no time. But Zalrath was too weak to move. Ethan cursed under his breath. "Come on, don't do this now." Zalrath grabbed his wrist. Ethan froze. Zalrath's golden eyes locked onto his. There was something in them Ethan had never seen before. Acceptance. "You have done enough, human," Zalrath rasped. "Go." Ethan's throat tightened. "Like hell, I'm leaving you." Zalrath shoved him back. "If you die here," the Draveri commander said, "then my survival meant nothing." Ethan stared at him, his mind screaming. No, this wasn't how it was supposed to end. But Zalrath was right. If Ethan stayed, neither of them would make it out. Zalrath's eyes softened. "Go, warrior." Ethan took a step back. His fists clenched. Then he turned and ran. The facility erupted behind him as he sprinted through the crumbling corridors. The last thing he saw was Zalrath, watching him go. Then the smoke swallowed him whole. The aftermath. Ethan burst into the night air, gasping as the ruins trembled from the impact of the explosion. The facility was gone. Nothing but fire and rubble remained. Ethan's chest heaved. Zalrath was gone. And yet, Ethan had never felt more alive. Relvek's secrets, the experiments, the lies. The entire war was built on something far darker than anyone had imagined. Ethan clenched his jaw. Zalrath had sacrificed himself to stop whatever was happening in that facility. And now, Ethan had one last mission. He would find out who was behind this, and he would burn it all down. The ultimate betrayal. The ruins smoldered behind him. Ash rained down like dead stars. The once mighty Draveri facility was nothing more than a burning graveyard. Ethan stood at the edge, staring into the fire. His body ached, his wounds screamed, but the pain in his chest was worse than any bullet wound. Zalrath was gone. Ethan had never called him a friend. Not really. They had been enemies first, survivors second. And yet, as he stood there, gripping his rifle with white-knuckled hands, he felt like he had lost something more than just an ally. A voice in his head whispered, "Did he really die?" Ethan clenched his jaw. There was no time for doubt. Because now he had a mission. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't fighting for a flag. He was fighting for the truth. Hunted. Ethan moved fast, weaving through the ruins like a ghost. He had no backup, no home to return to. Both sides would be hunting him now. His own commanders would call him a traitor. The Draveri would want him dead. Relvek, that snake, would never let him escape. Ethan needed to disappear. He found an abandoned Draveri scout station. Small, barely functional, but still intact. A broken terminal flickered inside. If he was lucky, he could hack into the Draveri comms network and intercept transmissions. Find out what the hell was really going on. Ethan powered up the terminal. The screen glowed faintly, showing ancient Draveri script. He tapped a few keys, running a brute force decryption. Lines of data scrolled past. Military logs, supply routes, mission reports. Then, a message. Priority to Uranus mission. Inquisitor Relvek. Sub GCT. Operation CLEANSLAT. Ethan's heart pounded. He opened the file. And what he read made his blood run cold. Operation Clean Slate. The transmission wasn't about war. It was about erasing evidence. The Draveri leadership and certain factions of the human government had been working together. The war, the bloodshed, the endless cycle of destruction. It was all a cover. For something worse. The enhanced soldiers Ethan had seen. They were just phase 1. The real plan was global-scale experimentation. Both humans and Draveri were being abducted, modified, tested on. And anyone who found out, they were eliminated. Ethan's stomach twisted. Zal Rath had been right. This war was a lie. And Ethan was now the only one alive who knew the truth. Then, a warning beep. Someone had pinged his location. Ethan cursed, smashing the terminal. They were coming. He grabbed his rifle and ran. Captured. He didn't make it far. A thunderous impact slammed into his side, sending him flying into a crumbling wall. Ethan hit the ground hard, his rifle skidding across the dirt. He rolled onto his back, reaching for his sidearm. A boot pressed down on his chest. Ethan gritted his teeth, staring up at the figure above him. Relvek. The Inquisitor loomed over him, his golden eyes filled with amusement. Around him, Draveri forcers stood in a tight circle, their weapons trained on Ethan. "You truly are persistent," Relvek mused. "I must say, I admire that." Ethan glared at him. "You're going to kill me, aren't you?" Relvek's lips curled. "Eventually. But first, I need something from you." He crouched, his claws resting lightly against Ethan's throat. "You accessed the transmission, didn't you?" Ethan didn't answer. Relvek chuckled. "Oh, Captain Cole, do you truly think you are the first to uncover the truth? Many before you have tried. And yet here we are." Ethan spat blood. "Yeah. Then why am I still alive?" Relvek's golden eyes gleamed. "Because I am offering you a choice." The Inquisitor stood, dusting off his armor. "Join us." Ethan froze. Relvek continued, his voice almost gentle. "You have seen the weakness of your people, their corruption, their lies. But with us, you could be more." Ethan exhaled slowly. "You want me to become one of your monsters?" Relvek smiled. "I want you to evolve." Ethan laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Yeah, no thanks." Relvek sighed. "A shame." Then he raised his hand. A Draveri soldier stepped forward, lifting the shock baton. Electricity crackled. Ethan barely had time to react before the baton slammed into his ribs. Pain exploded through his body. His vision went white. Then, everything went black. The return of Zal Rath. The first thing Ethan felt was cold metal. His wrists were chained to a table. His head pounded. His entire body ached. He was in a cell. Relvek's voice echoed from somewhere nearby. "Your kind always disappoints me, Captain Cole." Ethan gritted his teeth, forcing his eyes open. Relvek stood outside the cell, watching him like a scientist observing an insect. "You had a chance," the Inquisitor mused. "A chance to become something greater. Instead, you cling to your pathetic ideals." Ethan forced a smirk. "Yeah, well, I'm stubborn like that." Relvek shook his head. "No matter. Soon, you will be nothing more than a memory." He turned, speaking to a guard. "Prepare the subject for termination." Ethan's pulse spiked. He struggled against the chains. The guard moved toward him, a blade gleaming in the dim light. Then, boom, the entire facility shook. An explosion ripped through the walls. Relvek stumbled back, snarling. "What?" Then, a deep, rumbling voice. "I believe you owe me a debt, human." Ethan's heart nearly stopped. Zal Rath. The Draveri commander stepped through the smoke, his armor cracked, his body scared but standing. His legs still didn't work, but he had rigged himself into an exoframe, a powerful mechanical support strapped to his lower body. He was alive. Ethan grinned. "You just won't die, huh?" Zal Rath bared his fangs. "Neither do you." Relvek's golden eyes flashed with rage. "Kill them." The battle wasn't over. It had just begun. The final stand. The facility was in chaos. Alarms howled. Sparks rained from shattered ceiling panels. Smoke and fire spread through the corridors as the walls trembled under the force of multiple explosions. And in the middle of it all, stood two warriors who were never meant to fight together. Ethan Cole, the human soldier branded a traitor. Xal'Rath, the Draveri warrior abandoned by his own kind. Both had nothing left to lose. Both had one final mission: take down Inquisitor Ralvek and end the war built on lies. The battle begins. Ralvek's golden eyes blazed with fury as he took a step back. His cloak whipped behind him as his enforcers rushed forward, weapons raised. "Kill them," Ralvek roared. Ethan ripped his chains free, the broken metal clattering to the floor. Xal'Rath, standing in the doorway with his newly fitted exoframe, let out a deep, rumbling growl. "I have waited long for this," Xal'Rath muttered. The first Draveri soldier lunged, aiming for Ethan's throat. Bang! Ethan fired first, his bullet punching through the enforcer's armor, sending him crashing to the ground. The Xal'Rath charged forward, his exoframe enhancing his speed. He caught another enemy by the throat, twisting sharply. A sickening crack echoed through the chamber as the soldier collapsed. More were coming. Too many. "We need to move," Ethan shouted. Xal'Rath grabbed a fallen rifle from one of the dead enforcers. "Agreed. But Ralvek is mine." Ethan smirked. "Wouldn't have it any other way." They fought their way through the burning corridors, side by side, a human and a Draveri, fighting not as enemies, but as survivors. The showdown. Ralvek was waiting for them in the command chamber. It was a circular war room, filled with holographic screens, maps, and control panels. A large viewport overlooked the battlefield outside. The Inquisitor stood at the center, calm, collected, untouchable. His golden eyes flickered with amusement. "You are both fools," Ralvek said. "This war will continue long after you are both dead." Xal'Rath bared his fangs. "Then let's make sure you don't live to see it." Ethan raised his rifle. "You've got about 10 seconds to surrender before we put you down." Ralvek smirked. "Surrender?" He spread his 4 arms wide. "I am not like the weaklings you've killed." Then his body began to change. Ethan's stomach dropped. His veins glowed. His muscles swelled. His armor split apart as his body expanded, reinforced with unnatural strength. Ralvek had undergone the same enhancements as the test subjects in the lab. Only this time, the modifications were complete. "You are nothing but insects to me now," Ralvek snarled, his voice no longer entirely Draveri. It was deeper, distorted, inhuman. Then he attacked. The last fight. Ralvek moved like a blur. Ethan barely had time to react before the Inquisitor slammed into him, sending him flying across the room. He crashed through a control panel, sparks exploding around him. Xal'Rath roared, charging forward, but Ralvek was faster. The enhanced Inquisitor dodged his strike and delivered a bone-crushing punch to Xal'Rath's ribs. The Draveri commander's exoframe screeched under the impact, sending him staggering back. Ethan coughed, rolling onto his knees. His vision swam, but he forced himself up. "If we don't stop him now, everything we've done is for nothing." He reached for his belt, his last grenade. One shot, one chance. Ralvek turned, his golden eyes locking onto Ethan. "You think your human tricks will save you?" he growled. Ethan pulled the pin. "Not tricks," he muttered. "Just war." He threw the grenade directly into the power core behind Ralvek. For the first time, Ralvek's expression changed. The explosion ripped through the chamber, engulfing the Inquisitor in a storm of fire and shattered metal. The shockwave threw Ethan and Xal'Rath back, the force slamming them against the walls. Ethan coughed, vision flickering. Smoke and debris filled the air. Xal'Rath pulled himself up, blood dripping from his jaw. He staggered forward, scanning the wreckage. And there, lying in the center of the flames, was Ralvek. His body twisted, broken, fading. Yet, he still tried to rise. "You," Ralvek wheezed. "You think You have won. Zalrath stepped forward. His golden eyes burned. No, he said. Then he drove his claws into Ralvek's heart. The Inquisitor let out a final, ragged breath. Then he was gone. The end of the war. The facility collapsed around them. Zalrath grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling him up. We must leave, he said. Ethan nodded weakly. Yeah. No arguments here. They barely made it out before the entire command center imploded, fire and metal raining down behind them. As they reached the outer ruins, Ethan collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. Zalrath stood beside him, his chest heaving. For the first time in his life, he looked tired. Ethan turned to him. So, what now? The Dravari warrior was silent for a moment. Then, he looked up at the burning wreckage. Now, his voice was quiet. Now we tell the galaxy the truth. Ethan let out a breathless laugh. You think anyone's gonna believe us? Zalrath grinned. They will, when we make them listen. The war was not over, but the real battle had just begun.